Let's bring in our CoinDesk Week in Review panel with Managing Editor of Markets, Brad Keoun, and Regulatory Reporter, Cheyenne Ligon. What a week, Brad and Cheyenne. I know it's been pretty sleepless in the newsroom. So let's, I guess, start off with you, Brad, in terms of the market sentiment. Is the FTX implosion bigger than anything else we've seen so far? And we've gone through, years of Mt. Gox, more recently the Terra Luna and Three Arrows Capital collapse. Maybe you could put into perspective just how huge this last week has been.
Well, let's see. Some of these other collapses in the early history of crypto were, much bigger. Just to take Bitcoin, for example, it was around 21 or so, I think maybe last week around this time, and it's now down around 16.8. So yeah, it's had a pretty big reckoning over this past week, and that's the biggest cryptocurrency. But it has not fallen out of bed. In some of the earlier days when really it was only Bitcoin that existed, and the price would fall like 80% in a single year. So but in the modern history, after March 2020 was probably the biggest crash that I've witnessed in my time covering crypto, where the COVID was coming into view, and people had no idea what was even going to happen with the traditional financial system, and crypto as kind of a new asset seen as super risky. It really tanked. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it went down to like 3,000 before the Federal Reserve came in and basically bailed out, a stealth bailout of the financial system. It was called that it was. And so, but yeah, this is, this is on the scale of the Terra collapse. I guess in that one, actually, that one took us down from 69,000 to about 20,000. Here we're going from 20,000 to 17,000. So, for Bitcoin and probably the broader crypto market cap, it's probably less than actually what we saw earlier this year. But of course, it's already down so much, so it just hurt. It's just a little more pain. But, and then these other things, FTT token just wiped out, and Solana, a lot of tokens are down a lot. Solana's down like 50% in the past week.
Mm-hmm. So, Cheyenne, is this good or bad for the crypto industry? I know you wrote an article about the White House's thoughts on the matter, and market history shows us that shakeouts, are necessary, a cleansing, so to speak, of bad actors, so that the overall industry becomes stronger, healthier, and grows, but maybe the White House thinks otherwise.
It's really hard to tell what's going to happen. I know yesterday the White House was pretty reluctant, it seemed, to even acknowledge it, but they were asked in the press briefing and said, look, we see what's going on. We're following it. We're not unaware of the situation. And if anything, this kind of reinforces earlier concerns we have about contagion. And I think that it's totally understandable how they would reach that conclusion based on what's happened this week.
Mm-hmm. And in this case, of course, there's no central bank to bail these guys out. But this just happens to, happen over and over again each cycle. And they get bigger and bigger with each passing crypto cycle. So if overall the long-term view is still bullish, Brad, how long does this short-term pain last?
We were talking about this earlier. And Matty Greenspan of Quantum Economics, he put out a note this week making the point that the big picture, really what's happening here is that the Federal Reserve is tightening monetary policy, and that's just put pressure on the entire industry. And, we saw what happened yesterday when that inflation report came out and it showed inflation going below 8%, down to 7.7% on the consumer price index, and markets took off, and the stock market rose the most in 2 years. And crypto, which is in the midst of a separate narrative of the FTX collapse and sort of going through its own little universe world trauma, was not up quite as much, but it still rose. Bitcoin was up like 10% yesterday, and so that is kind of the bigger theme here. To sort of go back to the Terra collapse, the real pain was in May, where we saw the Terra collapse, and then Celsius, Voyager, Three Arrows Capital, and here we have FTX just cratering, and it took probably a few months, where we were sort of recovering from the Terra collapse, and I mean, without any better prism into the future than anyone else, I would say it's probably the best guess. A few months, we're going to be sort of processing this hole in the crypto balance sheet.
Yeah, and I wonder, FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried was supposed to be the white knight for BlockFi, for Voyager, and so that there's going to be some fallout there. Is there going to be a white knight for SBF and FTX? We'll see. It looks like it's going to be some restructuring process going forward. But here's a question for Cheyenne. What was the media's role in elevating Sam Bankman-Fried and creating this cult-like persona?
That's a really interesting question. And I think, watching what's happened, this has been shocking. This has been shocking for all of us. And we cover this industry. So, how did we all, and I mean, not just CoinDesk, but all of the media outlets, how did so many people see this guy as, a quirky guy who sleeps on a beanbag and becomes a billionaire overnight and not think to ask questions? And, it feels a little Tinder swindler, like afterwards we're like, there were some things that were not quite right. And, I just think it shows that going forward, we need to be much more suspicious of any narrative that we're given.
Right.
Maybe it shows that people need to get more sleep.
I would have to say it was a very alluring narrative. I mean, we had this guy with the crazy hair who was your atypical finance guy and really wanted to show it. I mean, he, as you mentioned, slept on the beanbag. He didn't like to wear suits. He made a point of being very casual, and he was very charismatic. I mean, he was very much accessible to media. He was very exposed. People loved the narrative of, I'm doing this for effective altruism, making all this money to just give it away. He drove a Toyota Corolla. So there was this whole persona, a mystique created, and a narrative that was just, it was easy to eat it up. And, he was certainly one of my favorite crypto personalities because he was just so dynamic, and he was just very friendly and likable and, easy to talk to, and clearly very intelligent as well. But when he got as big, as fast as he did, it was very questionable. I mean, there were certainly, and there were people on Twitter who were calling it out, like what is going on with Alameda Research, what is going on with FTX, what are the conflicts involved therein. And then there were the folks who were leaving FTX US, such as their CEO, Brett Harrison, Sam Trabucco, their head of OTC. And so, I mean, there were definitely some questions in there, but it was just hard to pinpoint where the mistakes were. And I think even when this came to light, it was a surprise for a lot of folks who were working at FTX. So do you think it's too simplistic to say?
I mean, I love your sort of, personal confession there, Christine, and your experience with, is, I think, probably, I mean, a lot of people, were seduced by the story, as you say. I think what we're going to untangle here, over the course of, the bankruptcy case, the various, securities cases, maybe, investigations that are likely to ensue, Cheyenne, as you're talking about, probably some hearings in Washington. I mean, Elizabeth Warren, the senator, is going to try to get a hold of this story. But we're going to find out, I think probably the big question here, was this a case of Icarus, boy wonder flying too close to the sun, taking a lot of risk, and then having a swift come down, or was there some fraud here? I mean, some of the things that have come out over the past couple days have really made it sound like there may have been some. Yeah, could be, Christine. I mean, we're still digging on that.
Yeah. So the last interview I did with Sam was in June during Consensus by CoinDesk, and I met his parents in the Bahamas previously, Joe and Barbara Bankman-Fried. They're both Stanford professors, prolific campaign fundraisers for the Democratic Party. They no doubt had an influence on their son's political leanings and philosophical beliefs in effective altruism. I want to have you listen to this clip.
Your mom wrote a book on consequentialism, which, and correct me if I'm wrong, which is the idea that something is morally good if the consequences are good.
Yep.
Is that basically,
Yeah, I think that's basically right.
So is everything okay if, the ends justify the means?
So, yeah, it's a good question. And my answer is, well, you have to think about all the consequences, not just the first order consequences, right? If you do something and you're like, well, I stole money from this person, gave it to this other person, so they could use it more, maybe you're just thinking about, well, they could use it more, but what you're not thinking about is all the damage that you're doing to the fabric of society, right? To our ability to trust each other and to have, reasonable relationships and negotiations and have law and order and have that security and safety in which we feel empowered to go try and accomplish great things. And the damage that you do there, that second order harm, probably overwhelms, whatever first order effect you're having. And so, I do in the end think that it's the consequences that matter. But I think that people are often way too narrow-minded about what those consequences actually are, and forget that, that there are second order impacts to everything we do, and that those can, in the end, be the dominant factor in a lot of cases.
Right. So he allegedly did what he says you shouldn't do. He allegedly stole customer funds and used them to bail out other crypto companies. He knew that was wrong, but he was allegedly willing to take the risk anyway. And, I was listening to Anthony Scaramucci of Skybridge Capital talking on CNBC. He went to the Bahamas to try to help SBF, and he described the inner circle, knew what was going on, but many in the company did not. And they were shocked. And Scaramucci said he was equally shocked and was saying that this is the time to get in front of a regulator and try to make people whole again. So
crazy.
I guess, what's the lesson in all of this?
Brad, do you have any thoughts? I mean, for me, it's just like the warning signs were there all along. And that's just one of many clips that have surfaced in the last couple of days where he's saying something that how did we not realize at the time was highly questionable. There's one floating around where he tells a CFTC roundtable that they're basically fools for questioning what experienced retail traders want to do with their money. And looking back, I can't believe that nobody thought that raised any red flags.
I mean, I guess, I would have maybe a couple of high-level thoughts. I mean, crypto, it is a lot of people are still, entirely convinced and not crazy that, blockchain technology is just so powerful that it has really, just eaten everything in its path. And it has been the fastest growing thing in kind of all industries. It's a new technology that, humans just invented, a little over a decade ago. And there's all these people who are experimenting with it. And it has happened entirely outside the regulated environment. And that's the only reason that it has gone so far, is because it's been entirely unregulated for the most part. I mean, banks have barely evolved at all, in the past 50 years. There's been new tech, but crypto industry has just gone so far and so fast. And so, and it's because of that lack of regulation, there's also a lack of transparency. And so there's no supervisors checking the books of these firms behind the scenes and making sure everything's okay. And that is probably going to be something we'll see. The speculation.
Well, I could see Jeremy Allaire ominously say, maybe we should just rip the Band-Aid off and check on, any other shady businesses operating in the Bahamas that could potentially be exposed to Tether. But well, we got to wrap it up. But I want to mention NYDIG, the founder and chairman Ross Stevens, who's saying that the lesson in all this is don't invest in non-Bitcoin crypto, do not invest in non-Bitcoin DeFi, saying that NYDIG at least has consistently passed on opportunities to partner with the likes of FTX, 3 Arrows, BlockFi, Celsius, and others because they were destined to blow up and, had clear violations of U.S. securities laws. So there's that.